Okay, so this video is aimed to help you understand why in Nazi society so few people decided to stand up to the Nazis and resist the regime. This could appear in your essay as a 4-mark or maybe a 10-mark question, so we'll have a look at the 4 different reasons that I think are really important, and then at the end of the video you'll have some time to practice them. Now, I just want you to spend a couple of minutes having a look at this. Pause the video if you need to. But I want you to think about the idea of freedom. How do we know what freedom is and what it looks like? So have a look at these pictures here. Which of the people in these slides here are free? And how do you know? Now, one thing that really stands out to me is that this guy in the corner is sat looking really depressed with loads of work on his shoulders. Now, he doesn't look like he's a prisoner. He doesn't look like he's being held captive by anybody. But is he free? I don't think that he is. And I think that his problem is the same problem that the German people had under Hitler. They weren't happy, necessarily, but there were so many things stopping them being able to do anything. Family pressures, peer pressure, social pressures and everything else, that they didn't feel like, although they could physically stand up and do something, they weren't able to. So what can stop somebody speaking out when something really terrible is happening? As you know from your own knowledge, there was loads and loads of horrible things going on in Nazi Germany at the time, but people aren't standing up to them. And we talked about in your lessons all of the horrible examples of concentration camps or hospitals where they carried out mass infanticide. And if you look at pictures of them, there is a town in the distance, or they're actually in a town. And so there's no way that people didn't know what was going on, but they didn't stand up and they didn't speak out. Obviously some did, and that's a different video that you can have a look at. But a lot of people didn't, and we want to understand their reasons why. So here's my 4-mark question for you. Why did more people not resist the Nazis in Germany? As it's a 4-mark question, you know how this goes. You've got 4 sentences, so you can have 4 different points, or you can have 2 points that are substantiated. So you can say 2 examples, but they'd go into lots and lots of detail. Now, for me, if I was answering this question, I would go for the 4 straight sentences, and I'll show you why in a second. So why was there no opposition, which is another way that that question could be phrased? Why was there no opposition to the Nazis? Well, there are 4 different reasons for that, really. The Nazi successes, economic fears, state control, and effective use of propaganda. So let's have a look at this idea of Nazi successes. Many Germans did admire and trust Hitler. They were willing to put up with the terror and the horrible things that were happening in Germany and giving up their rights to political freedom and speech if they were able to work, have foreign successes, and they thought that they had a strong government who was looking after their best interests, really. So the Nazis managed to turn around Germany's economy, and this was greatly appreciated by the German people, and so a lot of people just put up with it. Many felt that the Nazis were bringing back discipline to Germany, which had been lost underneath the Weimar Republic. So go back and catch up with that stuff if you're not sure what I'm talking about. But all the different uprisings and all the lack of state control in the early 20s really did leave a deep-seated belief in German people's views that they wanted a strong government. So that was part of it. And then Hitler's foreign affairs... Hitler's foreign affairs were very successful between the years 1933 and 38. And so they managed to take back a lot of the humiliations of the First World War and the Treaty of Versailles, and the German people really appreciated it. They wanted to be part of a good and greater country. So my first sentence for this question will go something along the lines of the Nazis had so little opposition or resistance because people appreciated their foreign successes, such as getting rid of lots of aspects of the Treaty of Versailles and making Germany a strong country again. So there's my first bit that I've done. The next bit is economic fears. Now, Hitler made 2 promises to the German people in 1932 when he ran for the presidency. He promised them work and bread. And on the whole, he delivered those things to certain people and at certain times, but let's not go into it. But he did. On the whole, he managed to create jobs for a lot of Aryan German people, and they didn't want to lose their jobs. Germany had been hit so hard by the Depression that people were terrified of this idea of losing their jobs again, that they wouldn't be able to feed their families. Now, a lot of this was down to the whole idea of keeping your head down. Nazis, and we'll have a look at propaganda in a minute, but the Nazis were so good at persuading people that if they had these ideas that there was something wrong, or if they didn't agree with what the Nazis were doing, the propaganda was so strong that they didn't know if anybody else was feeling the same way. It was so powerful. There was just this cloud of propaganda over people, and so they didn't really feel like, they felt weird if they didn't agree with the Nazis, so it was very powerful in that sense. You've also got to bear in mind, from a middle class perspective, those businesses who paid money to the Nazi Party, who were involved in what the Nazis wanted them to do and were basically playing ball, they did really well. If a business owner doesn't give money to the Nazi Party and isn't seen publicly to support the party, then they don't get any government help. They can probably go bankrupt, and whole industries could have very serious issues. And so from a middle class perspective, that was a bit of a problem. Okay, so there's economic fears sorted. The next sentence, so the way I'd phrase that sentence would be, for working class people, they were afraid to speak up in case they lost their jobs, and which the Nazis had created. And if they're a middle class businessman, then they're afraid of losing their business. And that's how I talk about that one. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is state control. Now, we will do a separate video on this, and so I'm not going to go into it in too much detail. But the Nazis managed to control Germany through 4 different ways, and overall this is called the Terror. So there's the SS, who are a group loyal to Hitler, who are, I suppose, they're a military group. They have all sorts of, I won't go into them too much now because we just don't really have the time, but there's the SS and their control over Germany, the Gestapo, which is a secret police who are collecting intelligence, information about people, and listening into phone conversations, all that kind of stuff. We've got the police and the courts, and so policemen are told that they're not really supposed to arrest Nazis, and so they get away with quite a lot of stuff. And the Nazi controlled the magistrates, judges and courts, which meant that if a Nazi did anything wrong, they didn't really ever see a trial. They kind of got away with it. And the last is concentration camps, which I won't go into too much now, but alongside the large numbers of Jewish people who were sent to the concentration camps, the Nazis sent people who didn't agree with them. And so my next sentence for this answer will be talking about how Nazi state control, through these 4 different actors, managed to scare German people into silence. And last but not least, this idea of propaganda. Now, Joseph Goebbels, who, as you know, is a propaganda minister, was a really, really, really clever manipulator. And he managed to make sure that the majority of German people couldn't oppose the Nazis because they didn't even know what they were actually doing. The propaganda machine that was around in Nazi Germany made sure that ordinary people were not aware of all the horrible things that the Nazis were doing. And if they did hear any news, they'd hear it from a pro-Nazi kind of spin. And so I suppose the most obvious reason that most people didn't oppose the Nazis and didn't rise up against all the horrible things that they did is that they didn't know about them because of this effective propaganda. The last thing is that a lot of the propaganda was based around Hitler and his personality. And so if people were betraying the Nazis, they were betraying Hitler. And he had a huge cult following for him personally. And it suggested that support for him remained high throughout the 1930s, all the way through to 1944, even though the Germans knew they were losing the war. And so there was this whole idea about not going against Hitler personally. So these are the 4 sentences that I think that you should be using as part of your 4-mark question. Another way that you might get this is you might get a 10-mark question where it would say, to what extent did all German people support the Nazis? And obviously this is going to be half of it. So this would be your paragraph to say that they did, or they didn't resist them anyway. Okay, and I'll discuss the other half of what that 10-mark question would be on my next video, which would be about how people did resist the Nazis. So let's imagine it's a 4-mark question now. You're sat in your exam. You have, as I said, either 4 sentences, which are the ones in front of you, or you can do it as 1 point and 1 substantiation. It's totally up to you. I would do, as I've said, those 4 sentences because it's just easier to get the marks. So your 4 minutes are going to start now. When I say go, If you need to pause the video, go back and have a look at it, or go through your book before you do it. Do that now. And then imagine that you're sat in the exam. Your time starts now. One minute gone. Okay, that's half your time gone. 2 minutes left. Okay, 40 seconds remaining. Finish up your sentences. Okay, that's your time up. So write that answer down properly. Do it again and again and again. Have a practice so it's in your head. And then bring me your book, your revision book or your class book with your answer in, and I will mark it for you. Thank you.